I never thought the day my son remarried would turn into a nightmare. When I saw Alice, my wife, holding a serving tray, Victoria Sterling curled her lips and said, "One single drop of wine is enough to ruin this priceless carpet." Thomas, my son, stood beside her. He just smiled and said, "Mom, Dad, put on these aprons. You look more like staff than guests." I stood there frozen, outwardly calm. But deep inside, I knew one phone call would make all of them regret this moment. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I truly want to know where you are as you hear this story. And now, let me take you back to the unexpected moment that set everything in motion today. I stood there in silence watching Alice set the tray down. She tried to hold a smile, but the pain was clear in her eyes. The space around us felt frozen. Elegant guests, women in flowing gowns, men in expensive suits, laughed and chatted freely. None of them noticed that we had been pushed aside, placed at table number 45, the table reserved for the outdoor service crew. Our table sat between shrubs near the lake. The sunset in the distance was brilliant, yet it could not reach the dignity that was being quietly stripped away. I took a slow breath, forcing myself not to show my anger. Alice lowered her head, and in that moment I knew she could no longer stay calm under Victoria Sterling's attitude. All of this, over a single drop of wine, a tiny mark on a handmade carpet. Victoria scolded Alice as if she were a servant, not a guest. My chest tightened. Thomas stood right there, my own son. He said nothing to defend her. Instead, he smirked, handed me the apron they had prepared in advance, and said with a cold laugh, "Mom, Dad, put it on. You look more like servers than guests. Don't embarrass me in front of the Sterling family." I stared at the apron in my hands. Shame and pressure rose together. Alice quietly refused. She was too polite, too focused on keeping the peace. That was when I understood. This wasn't just a simple power play. It was a message. We see you as insignificant, and we want everyone to see it too. I knew it. Thomas and Chloe Sterling were mocking us, pointing out our middle-class background without saying it aloud. I looked around. Every eye was on us. No one stepped in. And then I realized their smiles were silent approval. Alice closed her eyes for a moment, trying to stay composed. But I knew she was fighting the weight of humiliation. I had always told her, we spent our lives building a family, raising our children, protecting our dignity. And now, all of that was being erased in minutes, in a place filled with luxury and polite laughter. Thomas wasn't finished. As Alice moved toward the table, Victoria even ordered her, "Go carry the appetizer trays. You're already standing around anyway. At least do something useful to make up for the cost of the reception." I heard every word, every sharp tone. This was no longer casual disrespect. It was planned, calculated, a performance meant to humiliate us in public. Alice hesitated. She only wanted peace for our son. I saw the worry in her eyes. But inside me, something was boiling quietly. This was no longer about being poor or middle class. This was systematic degradation, a deliberate act meant to turn us into a joke. I remembered every year, every quiet sacrifice we made for our children. And now, they wanted to push us out of the picture entirely. As Alice bent down, I accidentally caught part of a hushed conversation between Thomas and Chloe Sterling. Their voices were low, but clear. "After the wedding, put them in a cheap nursing home. The old house will be ours." I went completely still. The truth revealed itself in an instant. They didn't just disrespect us today. They planned to take everything. Our home, our independence, our dignity. The irony numbed me. I was the father, the man who taught his son the value of self-respect. And now my own son and daughter-in-law were degrading us. They wanted to turn us into hired help at our own child's wedding. No explanation, no chance to defend ourselves. Just public humiliation. Under the curious eyes of dozens of elite guests, one thing became very clear to me. If I stayed silent, they would win. And I had no intention of allowing that. In my mind, I began to calculate, quietly, not to take revenge the way they expected, but to expose the truth. Silence and composure would be my strongest weapons. And I knew. One phone call to the right person at the right moment would bring this entire display of arrogance crashing down. I looked at Alice. She was still trying to remain composed, but her hands were trembling. I gently took her hand, to comfort her and to send a message. We will not bow. Not today. Not ever. The air around us was tight like a drawn wire. Every laugh, every whisper from the guests only strengthened my resolve. We had been disrespected, but we were not defeated. And in that moment I knew the time had come. I would make the call. I would use a kind of power they never imagined, a power beyond wealth and luxury, to expose their unfilial hearts, to restore dignity to Alice, to myself, and to everyone they believed was beneath them. Right there, between the sunset and the public humiliation, a cold, steady determination settled in me. One action, one move, and everything was about to change. As I stood there, still holding Alice's hand gently, I heard Victoria Sterling continue her scolding. This time her voice carried calculation. "Alice, go carry the appetizer trays. You're already standing anyway. At least do something useful to make up for the cost of the wedding." I didn't need to look to know where her eyes were aimed, toward the nearby guests. She wanted them to see us working, as if our existence needed to be paid for. Alice hesitated. She bent slightly, her lips pressed tight. She wanted to please our son to avoid a scene, but I knew that silence was feeding the humiliation. Then I heard a soft laugh behind me. "Thomas," I clearly caught his whisper to Chloe. "After today, they'll have no choice but a cheap nursing home. The old house will be ours." My chest tightened. There was no doubt left. This wasn't a joke, not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate plan, carefully designed to humiliate us, take our property, and leave us defeated, in dignity and in rights. Alice looked at me. Her eyes held fear and trust. I took a deep breath, trying to pass some calm to her, even as I struggled to hold it myself. I understood then. If I didn't act, today's humiliation would only be the beginning. Not revenge through words or gestures, but through clarity and power they never expected. I began to observe everything around me. Every detail. Our table was hidden, yes, but it faced the main walkway where every guest had to pass. Every action, every word from Victoria and Thomas was fully exposed. They believed wealth and status protected them. They didn't realize their pride was the trap. One right move, and everything would reverse. Alice lifted the tray and took a few steps toward the food table. I gently placed my hand on her shoulder. "Stop." She looked at me, surprised and worried. I spoke quietly, steady. "We're not going to do what they want. We'll stand up, in our own way." She said nothing, but I saw a spark of resolve in her eyes. Then I overheard more of Thomas and Chloe's conversation, close enough to understand the full scheme. They were discussing how they would use today's wedding footage to collect proof of our so-called instability, then move us into a cheap nursing home. We would become a joke, not just to the guests, but to the family itself. Their cold calculation filled me with anger and clarity. I knew this plan would collapse if handled correctly. If I only stood there, they would win. So I chose silent, precise action. I took out my phone. My hand was steady. My heart was pounding. In my mind appeared the face of someone I had helped for more than 20 years. An old colleague, now a lawyer and financial advisor. A man with the authority to turn today upside down. I didn't need revenge. I needed the truth exposed, and our dignity protected. As I prepared to dial, Alice looked at me, anxious, yet trusting. She knew I wasn't acting on impulse. I kept my breathing slow, focused. Every movement, every contemptuous glance, every quiet laugh from Victoria and Thomas. I noted them all. This was evidence, and I would use it. I scanned the entire scene, the lighting, the seating, the guests. It was all part of a calculated display, and at the same time, an opportunity. If I activated my quiet power at the right moment, our silence would become the perfect reversal. No one suspected that the calm, ordinary father they mocked held power they could never predict. I held the phone in my hand, tension mixed with a quiet satisfaction. I realized something then. Our patience all these years, our fairness, our restraint, our silence, had become our greatest weapon. Alice stood beside me, head slightly lowered as if complying. But I knew she understood. In this moment, we were no longer beneath anyone. That patience, that caution, would make every move by Victoria Thomas and Chloe backfire. They were using the wedding to display dominance. They didn't know I held the card that could overturn everything. One decision, one phone call, not through shouting, not through confrontation, but through power built from a lifetime of experience, knowledge, and resolve. And in that brief moment, as Alice set the tray down, I looked around at the guests, at every face, and I knew this deliberate misunderstanding, this public humiliation they believed would break us, was only the first step toward exposure, toward justice, toward a power they never imagined. My heartbeat stayed steady, but everything was ready. I wasn't just witnessing the moment. I was controlling the entire game, in silence. I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket and quietly took out my phone. Alice stood beside me, slightly surprised, but she didn't ask anything. She knew me well. I've always moved in silence, step by step, not for revenge, but to protect dignity. My hand didn't shake. Inside, anger and resolve blended into a steady, controlled rhythm. I dialed a man I had helped for more than 20 years. Someone almost no one at this party knew, yet someone who held enough power to change everything. The call connected. My voice stayed calm, cold. I need you to act immediately, not for money, but for justice. In that instant, I saw Alice's eyes brighten, a quiet relief, as if she knew I was about to restore what belonged to us, in a way no one expected. I heard his breath on the other end. Then he said, "I understand. You want all funding tied to the Hamptons estate suspended right now." "Correct," I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. My voice was slow and steady. "Exactly. And make it public. They need to see who truly holds control." That was when a truth Victoria, Chloe, and Thomas never imagined became clear, even to me. I wasn't poor, not the way they believed. I owned the core material technology patents the Sterling Corporation had been using without permission for years. I had quietly supported them through construction contracts, but they never suspected that the calm, simply dressed man standing near table number 45 was the intellectual owner behind billions of dollars. I watched them from a distance. Alice gently placed her hand on my arm, feeling my heartbeat, steady but strong. I remembered every year, every quiet contribution, everything I had done so my son could live well, so the family could stay stable. And now they tried to erase it all with public humiliation. They didn't understand one thing. Power doesn't live in carpets or expensive dresses. It lives in what you build, silently, over a lifetime. I pressed another key, instructing the immediate suspension of all financial transactions tied to the estate. My lawyer and advisor confirmed it. All contracts, all funding, frozen. The current use of the estate now violated the control terms of a trust where my voice carried weight. Within minutes, the structure of power they depended on collapsed in silence. The arrogant smiles, the contemptuous glances. They dissolved into quiet confusion. I turned to Alice. She didn't speak, but the relief in her eyes was unmistakable. We were still standing at table number 45, between the shrubs and the sunset. But everything had changed. We were no longer beneath anyone. Our silence, our composure, had become strength. That phone call was the turning point. While Victoria and Chloe still believed their status would protect them, I knew the truth would reach them soon. I heard Chloe whisper to Thomas, "Are you sure he wasn't bluffing?" I smiled inwardly. I didn't need words. Real power had already been set in motion. The consequences would reveal themselves naturally, right when they felt most secure. I remembered the conversation I had overheard earlier, the plan to put us in a nursing home, to take the old house. I knew Alice had heard it too. I knew how hard she worked not to cry. I placed my hand on her shoulder, a reminder. We would not be broken. Everything they had done would be exposed, not through shouting, but through legal and financial authority they could not control. I looked around. Guests were beginning to whisper. Eyes turned toward us. But this time I felt no shame, only anticipation, curiosity. I knew it would be only minutes before the humiliation in the scheme would be completely reversed. Alice stood beside me, silent. Her hand tightened around mine, sharing strength and resolve, and then I felt it clearly. What began today as public degradation would not end in disgrace. It would become a turning point, the moment our long-held silent power was finally revealed. None of them, not Thomas, not Chloe, not Victoria, could have predicted that the man they dismissed held decisive authority, enough to freeze assets, suspend estate rights, and make them pay for arrogance and unfilial betrayal. I stood there, phone still in my hand, breathing steady. I looked at Alice. She smiled softly, not bright, but filled with trust and relief. I knew this call, this single decision, was not just a clever response. It was the only way to protect our dignity, our rights, and expose the truth they thought they could bury. Under the burning sunset, beside the hidden table number 45, our silence felt stronger than ever. No shouting, no arguments, just truth and power, applied at the right moment. And I knew, in just a few more minutes, Henry Vance and Alice would no longer be overlooked. We would be the ones, quietly, firmly, controlling the game. I lowered the phone. My breathing stayed steady, but my chest felt tight. In just a few minutes, the power I had held in silence began to surface. Everything still looked the same. Sunlight filtering through the trees, soft music floating in the background, guests in tailored suits and elegant gowns smiling and chatting. But the air had shifted, quietly and decisively. I caught the first hint of worry in Victoria's eyes, the hesitation in Chloe's movements. And Thomas, my son, suddenly stood stiff, awkward, as if weighed down by something he could no longer control. I said nothing. I stayed at table number 45, my hand resting lightly on Alice's shoulder, watching from a distance. Then, step by step, a group of lawyers and security personnel appeared at the entrance of the estate. No shouting, no spectacle, yet their presence alone caused laughter to fade, confidence to pause. Victoria turned pale. She tried to hold on to her commanding tone, but I could see the crack beneath it. Chloe gripped Thomas's hand tightly, as if clinging to power she believed was still there. One of the lawyers stepped forward. His voice was calm, firm. The Sterling family is not authorized to use this property. Continuing this event violates funding agreements and the control terms of the trust. Victoria gasped. Her voice trembled as she tried to threaten. Do you know who holds power here? This can be solved with money. Then her eyes met mine. In that instant she understood. I was the one controlling the financial power they depended on. I remained silent. My hand stayed near my phone, ready to reveal more if needed. Chloe stepped toward me, forcing strength into her voice. You can't do this. I looked at her calmly, my eyes steady, cold. I didn't need explanations. I didn't need arguments. Power lives in preparation, in knowledge others never suspect. And I had used it at the right moment. Alice stood beside me, her head slightly lowered, but there was new confidence in her eyes. She knew their arrangement was falling apart. Then I reached into my jacket and took out a small USB drive, connecting it to my phone. A recording played through the space. Thomas's voice. My son's voice. Whispering with Chloe about putting us in a cheap nursing home. About taking the old house. The room fell silent. The background music seemed to disappear. Victoria, Chloe, and Thomas stared at each other. Panic written plainly across their faces. The guests who once smiled with quiet contempt now turned to look stunned. No laughter, no confidence, only silence. A kind of power far stronger than wealth or status. There was no shouting, no dramatic display. Truth and authority were enough to collapse every plan they had built. Victoria stepped forward, her voice shaking. You can't. I stood still, my voice calm, measured. This was prepared long ago. Power doesn't come from dresses or carpets. It comes from who controls the truth and the law. Chloe clutched Thomas's hand. Her words failed her. They knew it. Threats no longer worked. Money no longer mattered. Everything had reversed. Guests began whispering, reacting to the recording. Some looked shocked. Others quietly impressed. Thomas lowered his head. Finally realizing the game he thought would crush us had turned against him. I said nothing more. I simply held Alice's hand, standing firm, calm, at the center of a silent storm. I saw regret in Victoria's eyes, tension and helplessness in Chloe's movements, and Thomas at last facing what he had done, not through revenge, but through quiet power they never imagined I held. The lavish wedding, the place they believed they could humiliate and control us, had become a scene of complete reversal. Alice smiled softly, not brightly, but with meaning. She knew that in this moment we were no longer diminished. We had revealed the truth, protected our dignity and our rights, and proved something they never understood. Silence, preparation, composure. These can be stronger than any title or fortune. I looked around, feeling my heartbeat settle. The public humiliation, the calculated scheme, all undone, in minutes. No shouting, no chaos, just truth and power, changing everything. The celebration they thought they controlled collapsed quietly, and we, Alice and I, remained standing, calm, unshaken, and undeniably powerful. After the recording played, the reception was no longer Victoria's or Chloe's. There was no mocking laughter, no pride from people who once believed they could control everything. Every gaze turned toward them now, not with respect, but with shock, and in some faces, quiet anger from guests who had witnessed how we were humiliated. I held Alice's hand, feeling calm spread between us. Victoria and Chloe unraveled. Victoria tried to shout threats, but no one listened. They finally understood that the power they thought they owned, money, status, control of the estate, now rested with me. Thomas stood frozen. Regret filled his eyes. He seemed to realize that his actions had only exposed him, in front of family and guests alike. I didn't scold. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at them, calm and cold. There was no need to cancel the wedding, no need for spectacle. One correct decision was enough. Suspend the right to use the estate, expose the betrayal, protect our rights, and everything collapsed on its own. The wedding continued, but without sterling luxury. Staff were pulled back. Lawyers and security took control. Thomas and Chloe were forced to finish the event in tension and shortage. Guests began to leave. The excitement was gone. So was the praise. I looked at Alice. In her eyes, I saw quiet joy. She knew we had preserved our dignity. And more than that, we had proven something important. Kindness, patience, composure. These are real strength. I smiled softly, not because I had won, but because fairness had arrived naturally, without cruelty, without excess. As the reception wound down, Alice and I prepared to leave. We walked slowly. Our old car waited near the exit. Our heartbeats were steady. I glanced back at the estate. The place that had become a stage for humiliation now stood silent. No shouting, no chaos. Only the quiet awareness that true power doesn't come from money or appearances, but from preparation, understanding, and dignity. Before leaving, I signed over the entire royalty compensation, the portion under my authority, to a scholarship fund for children of working families. Alice stood beside me, smiling quietly. She knew this wasn't just fairness. It was planting kindness, creating real value for those who truly needed it. We carried no hatred. We sought no extreme revenge. We simply did what was right, the way we had believed in our entire lives. On the drive out of the Hamptons, sunset light poured through the windshield. I thought about my son. Thomas had made a serious mistake, but his regret, I hoped it would become his lesson. No punishment was needed, no yelling, just letting him face the natural consequences of arrogance and betrayal. I wanted him to learn the value of family, of dignity, of kindness. Alice sat beside me holding my hand. She didn't say much, but her eyes were full of understanding. I smiled softly. After all the humiliation, the schemes, the calculations, we were still standing. We had protected our dignity, secured our rights, and planted kindness where it mattered. When we arrived home, I rested my hand on the door and took a deep breath. Everything today, the shock of seeing Alice scolded the deliberate plan to humiliate us, and finally the power set in motion by one call, had led to an ending that was both fair and humane. I looked at Alice. She smiled gently. Peace settled in. We didn't need anyone's approval. Our dignity and kindness spoke for themselves. I thought about the message I hoped my son, my daughter-in-law, and anyone hearing this story would understand. A person's value is not in the suit they wear or the family they marry into. It's in the kindness they cultivate over a lifetime. Never look down on those who built the foundation for you. People like Alice and me who choose integrity and patience will always see fairness return, quietly, but undeniably. The car rolled down an empty road, the sunset glowing behind us. Alice and I sat in silence, feeling life slow back into rhythm. No theatrics, no performance, just composure, preparation, and kindness. We had endured it all, and this story will always remind me and Alice and hopefully our son, that dignity and self-respect are the most precious things in life, things no one can ever take away. We left quietly, calm, whole. The reception had collapsed. The schemes were exposed. But what remained was far more valuable. Dignity, fairness, and a human truth no amount of money or status can replace. Thank you for listening to this story today. If you found it meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share so you don't miss future stories. Every subscription, every share, helps us continue telling real, humane stories about family, kindness, and dignity. Once again, thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.